Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Jaya, thank you everyone for coming. Today we'll be reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 52, verse 40. And the title of the chapter is Rukmini's Message to Krishna. Porteshta datta niyamana brata deva vipa. Gurv archana dibir alam bhagavan padesha. Aradito yadigadagraja etyapanim. Rina tume nadamagosha sutadayomnye. Porteshta datta niyama brata deva bripra. Gurv archana dibir alam bhagavan padesha. Aradito yadigadagrash etyapanim. Grina tume nadamagosh sutadayo ninye. Porteshta datta niyamam brata deva vipra. Gurv archana dibir alam bhagavan padesha. Aradito yadigadagrajad etyapanim. Grina tume nadamagosha sutadayomnye. Jai Mataji. Teshta datta niyamana brabdeva vipra. Gurv archana dibir alam bhagavan padesha. Aradito yadigadagrasha etyapanim. Grina tume nadamago satadayane. Word for word, porta, by pious words, such as feeding brahmanas, digging wells, etc. Ishta, sacrificial performances. Datta, charity. Niyama, ritual observances, such as visiting holy places. Brata, vows of penance. Deva, of the demigods. Vipra, brahmanas. Guru, and spiritual masters. Archana, by worship. Adibihi, and by other activities. Alam, sufficiently. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Para, supreme. Ishaha, controller. Araditaha, rendered devotional service. Yadi, if. Gada agrajaha, Krishna, the elder brother of Gada. Etya, coming here. Panim, the hand. Grinatu, may please take. Me, my. Na, not. Damagosha, Sutta, Shishupal, the son of Damogosha. Adayaha, and so on. Anye, others. Translation and purport by the disciples of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jaya. Translation, if I, context, Rukmini Devi is speaking. So she says, if I have sufficiently worshipped the Supreme Personality of Godhead by pious works, sacrifices, charity, rituals, and vows, and also by worshiping the demigods, brahmanas, and gurus, then may Gada Graj come and take my hand, and not Damogosha's son or anyone else. Purport. The Acharyas comment as follows on this verse, quote, Rukmini felt that no one could obtain Lord Krishna by the efforts of a single lifetime. Therefore, she earnestly pointed out the pious activities she had performed in that life and previous lives, hoping to convince Sri Krishna to come. End quote. Amagantimanandasya gananjana shalakaya shakshumilitam nena tasmai Shri Guruve namaha Shri Chaitanya manobishtam stapitanyena bhutale swayam rupa kadamayam dadati swapadantikam vanshakapaturubhya sha kripa sindubhya eva cha patitanam pavinebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaurabhatabinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jai. Thank you everyone for coming. I have to acknowledge the new guest, Teja Mataji, is that correct? Teja Mataji and Anaya. Oh, I was correct. I can't believe I remembered it. Jai, thank you for coming. They're from Atlanta, and hopefully we'll leave a good impression on you here at ISKCON Chicago. But if not, you've already left a good impression on us, because in the Nectar of Instruction it says, Krishneti Yasagiri Tamana Sadriyeta. Even if somebody's chanting Krishna's names, then we should at minimum offer respect within the mind. And Krishna says in the Gita, anyone who distributes this knowledge of mine is considered the most dear to me. So thank you for coming to Chicago and showering us with your blessings and book distribution. And I know you have a good association with Mahotsa. How do you say his name? Mahotsa, right? Prabhu. So he's a very empowered, clearly devotee. And thank you, Angel, for coming also, so for showering us with your blessings. Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone else. And of course, I can't forget my the primary people in my life, my mother and my brother, His Grace Jai Jagannath Prabhu. So as usual, I like to start off class with a quote that sets the theme of what we'll be discussing today. And this is by a very ancient Acharya. I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard of him before. His name is Srila Martin Luther King Jr. So I'm sure we've all heard of him before. He says a very nice quote. He says, quote, we've learned to fly the air like birds. We've learned to swim the seas like fish. And yet, we haven't learned to walk the earth as brothers and sisters. End quote. So let me repeat that quote. We've learned to fly the air like birds. We've learned to swim the seas like fish. And yet, we haven't learned to walk the earth as brothers and sisters, end quote. So in this regard, it should be pointed out that what is the Srimad Bhagavatam meant to teach us? In essence, the Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to teach us how to walk the earth as brothers and sisters. However, what prevents us from walking the earth as brothers and sisters? Well, when we desire anything other than Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Matihi, our love for Krishna. So therefore, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a nice verse. It says, Krishna Bhakta Nishkama Ata Eva Shant Bhuti Muti Siddhi Kami Sakaliya Shant. It says that a Krishna Bhakta is always Shanta, peaceful, because she desires nothing but Krishna. A Maya Bhakta is always Ashanta, disturbed, because he desires everything but Krishna. So therefore, Rukmini Devi, in this particular pastime, is teaching us what to do. Why? Because she desires nothing but Krishna. Whereas Shishupal is teaching us what not to do. How? Because he's desiring everything but Krishna. So we see throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, it essentially describes that there are two kinds of teachers. Those who teach us what to do, and those who teach us what not to do. So therefore, there's a nice quote by Confucius. He says, if I am walking with two other men, each of them will serve as my teacher. I will pick out the good points of the one and imitate them, and the bad points of the other and correct them in myself. When we see persons of worth, we should think of equaling them. When we see persons of a contrary character, we should turn inward and examine ourselves. So the conclusion is that if we desire anything, or if we desire everything but Krishna consciousness, or desire everything in the name of Krishna consciousness, then we cannot walk the earth as brothers and sisters. So therefore, Lord Chaitanya taught us, Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Vajaga Isha Kamaye, Mama Jamani Jamanishware Bhavata Bhatir Ahai Tuki Twayi. He says, he describes that some of the things we desire in the name of Krishna consciousness, Danam, lots of wealth. What happens when, let's say we have a friend, and we all on the equal economic level, but suppose they win the lottery, then potentially that may ruin a relationship. Either they may become proud, or we may become envious, especially if they don't give us a piece of their money. So we see this, we cannot walk the earth as brothers and sisters if we have this desire for unlimited wealth. And Janam, followers. Lord Chaitanya, I do not want any followers. So I'm remembering, especially like desiring things in the name of Krishna consciousness. I remember when I first went on book distribution in 2007, which is like I'm getting old. I'm sure you guys were probably like, what, 10 or something? So I've been doing this for a long time. I've been in this community for almost 20 years. I can't believe it. I'm getting old, so. But in 2007, my brother had been standing in the temple for a few years. He was a serious devotee, doing book distribution, Harinam, etc. So in 2007, that's when I started to, just me and him, go on book distribution, Harinam, college programs, etc. So it was fun. It was nice when it was me and him, and we went to college programs, and we were always out distributing books or doing Harinam alternatively. So gradually, many devotees moved in, but one particular devotee who moved in kind of right after that, maybe in 07 or 08, his name was Prachak Prabhu. So we will all go out on book distribution. And the reason I'm sharing this is because we have book distributors here, so maybe you'd like to hear a nice book distribution story. So anyways, my brother had been a serious devotee for a couple of years before Krishna made me get serious. So there was no envy. If he could distribute more books to me, it was like, no big deal, He's a seasoned devotee. But this one devotee named Prachak Prabhu, I was coming to Krishna consciousness at least a few years before him. So in the course of one day, we were distributing books. We were all more or less getting some books out here and there. But Prachak Prabhu, he was, you could say, junior to both me and my brother. He was distributing books like flyers. And not only that, he was getting donations for it, because it's easy to just give out books, right? Okay, no big deal. But the real trick is to get donations. So then I'm thinking, I prayed to Krishna. Oh, this probably wasn't a good prayer. Oh, Lord Krishna, please don't let them get out more books than me. I know, please let your mercy be given to the suffering world only through me. So these are some thoughts you have when you have this competitive mentality. I'm thinking, I don't think this is the right thought. So as I was saying the other day, if we don't preach to the mind, then the mind will preach to us. And so this is one reason why we cannot walk the earth as brothers and sisters when we have these bad qualities, or you could say when we don't subdue these bad qualities. So our primary, you could say, devotional activity to subdue our bad qualities is chanting the holy name, and of course hearing the Bhagavatam, and of course many other devotional limbs. But I really love this analogy I always keep in mind in subduing our bad qualities. So once upon a time, a father wanted to teach his 18-year-old son, Jason, a lesson on taming the tongue. Why? Because all throughout Jason's life, he was always the most popular kid. He was a straight-A student, and he was the star athlete on his basketball team. Consequently, Jason became very proud by thinking, I can say anything to anyone and get away with it. But his father warned him. He says, my dear Jason, it doesn't matter how powerful we are or how powerful we think we are. We can always be humbled by Almighty God. But like most teenagers, Jason did not listen to his father. But circumstances would eventually humble him the hard way, like for most of us. Indeed, during Jason's freshman, sophomore, and junior year in high school, he always made the basketball team. But during his senior year in high school, he got cut from the team. Why? Because his best friend Eric told him that the new basketball coach for his senior year was the father of one of the students he bullied all throughout high school. So the moral of the story is that just as criminals who escape from prison will cause problems for all of human society, so when our bad qualities escape from us through our words and our actions, they cause problems for us and potentially for others, right? So how does the government subdue criminals? With security guards, right? So it's described that a wise person subdues pride with humility, envy with appreciation, and vengeance with forgiveness. So whatever bad quality we have, we're meant to subdue it by the good qualities. Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati akanchana sarva gunais tatra samasate suraha. That's what the Bhagavatam describes. Sarva gunais. We're meant to cultivate all these good qualities. Why? To subdue our bad qualities. So therefore there's a saying, as long as the word remains unspoken, you are its master. Once you utter it, you are its slave. And so there's one I also like to quote often, and I like to hear these things because we have to remind ourselves of this. So there's one that says, watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Savaimana Krishna pada ada vinda yorvachamti vaikunta gunanarvanane. This is a famous verse by Ambarish Maharaj, and he says, Savai mana Krishna. When I think of Krishna, what's the domino effect? I speak about Krishna. And what's the domino effect of speaking about Krishna? We act in Krishna consciousness. And so therefore we should be very careful of what we're thinking, because they lead to words, words lead to actions, etc. It leads to our destiny. And on the other hand, when we think, you could say, negative thoughts, then what's the result? Pranashati. Dhyayato vishayam pumsa sangase shubhajayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kama krodho bijayate krodha bhavati samoha samoha shiti vibramaha shiti bramsha buddhinasho buddhinasha pranashati. The Gita, this is a very famous verse from the, chapter 2, verse 62 through 63. It says, while contemplating the objects of the senses. And what is that? Nadanam najanam, I want more followers than others. So what happens if somebody gets more followers than you, more subscribers than you, more likes than you, more retweets? So we're actually conditioned in this age to put ourselves above others. So what happens when somebody gets more followers? You're contemplating the objects of the senses, even if it's a subtle object. And what is that subtle object? Fame. So what happens when other people get more fame than you? Then the Gita says, Krotha, anger arises. From anger, delusion. From delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. And when intelligence is lost, we do things that we'll very much regret, actually. So that's the conclusion, that we should be very mindful of what we're thinking. Now the question is that how to walk the earth. So this is for some participation. So my question in this particular pastime, it describes that Rukmini Devi, she only heard about Krishna, and therefore she became attached to Krishna. So my question to everyone here is that what's the first thing a baby hears when they're born? Can anyone say? What's the first thing a baby hears when they're born? Okay, I'll give you a better hint. What's the first thing that a baby hears when they're born that enables them to walk with each other as brothers and sisters? Can anyone say? Any answer? Please help me out. Tell us? Oh. He hears his own crying. So do we when we don't get our way, so we hear our own. Any other answers? No. It's like a standard routine where everyone like, he hears people smiling, laughing. But the first thing that a baby hears that enables him to walk the earth as brothers and sisters with everyone he meets is language. Is that not correct? Language. He learns language. So we see that in this world, that when you speak the same language as someone else, you're more inclined to walk as brothers and sisters. Why aren't we walking like brothers and sisters in France? Because we do not speak the language, right? So people are more inclined to be unified when somebody speaks the same language as them. Is that not correct? All right, it's a rhetorical question. In much the same way, so why do we see in this world that people who speak the same language still cannot communicate with each other? That's the question. So this reminds me of a nice story in His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj's book. A nice realization that came. So long story short, there was a Srila Prabhupada disciple, and his name is Radhanath Maharaj. And he wrote a autobiography at the request of his dying godbrother, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. And he has a unique story of how he came to Krishna consciousness. He actually came to Krishna consciousness, he was born in 1950, and he came to Krishna consciousness around 1970. But around 1970, without going into too much details of the story, but to stick to the main points, that he hitchhiked throughout Europe. He's from Chicago, first of all. But the opportunity came for him to go to Europe. So he ended up hitchhiking throughout Europe, the Middle East, and India. So when he came to India, he met so many yogis, swamis, gurus, and babajis. So one day he says, I met a man known as Kailash Baba. And he says, Kailash Baba, he taught me so many things. He taught me what to eat, what not to eat, what plants were edible, what plants were poisonous, what plants were medicinal, how to respect nature, how to respect the animals in nature. He taught me so many things. And at the end of this sentence or paragraph, he says, and we did not even speak the same language. He says, I only spoke English and he only spoke Hindi. But somehow or other, he was able to convey very profound life lessons to me and how to live in this world. So the realization and the lesson I got from this very beautiful story is that just because people don't speak the same language, that doesn't mean they can't communicate. On the other hand, just because people do speak the same language, that doesn't mean they can communicate. It's not the language, but the love that allows people to communicate. If we're humble, appreciative, and forgiving, then we could communicate with others, even if we don't speak the same language. If we're proud, envious, and vengeful, then we cannot communicate with others, even though we do speak the same language. So we see in this pastime, why couldn't Shishupal or Rukmini is Devi's brother, how come they couldn't communicate with Krishna? They spoke the same language. Well, it's described that they were envious of Krishna, in much the same way I was envious of Patrak Prabhu. He was distributing books like flyers. So I was like, when he distributed less books to me, he was my friend. When he distributed more books to me, he was my enemy. And so we see this is the nature of the world, that Dharma Prochito Kaitava Atra Paramo Nirmatsarama Satam. In order to communicate with others, the very beginning of the Bhagavatam is that we have to be completely free from this Matsaranam, this envy, because in this world, everyone wants to be the center of the universe. There's a saying, when they discover the center of the universe, a lot of people will be disappointed to discover they are not it. So when I discovered that I wasn't the center of the universe, and for that moment Prashak was, I wasn't very happy about that. So this is the nature of our relationships in this world. Now the question may arise that feeding ourselves with knowledge, a language, is compared to feeding ourselves with food. Just as a person who feeds their body with food will remain physically strong, so it's also described that if we feed our minds with wisdom, we'll remain spiritually strong. So therefore, there's a nice quote. It says, "Feed your faith, and your fears will starve to death." Even in the Holy Bible, Lord Jesus Christ says, "A man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of Almighty God." Bhakti Paresha Anubhava Viratir Anyatra Chaishatrika Eka Kalaha Prapadya Manasa Yatashnatasu Tushti Pushi Shu Apayo Anugasam. This is a very famous verse that Prabhupada will always quote. This is from the 11th canto, chapter 2, verse 42. And it says the same thing. We become spiritually strong when we feed ourselves with spiritual knowledge. In much the same way, we become physically strong when we feed ourselves with food. Now the question is that we see that as spiritualists, we're supposed to become strong in our humility, strong in our appreciation, strong in our forgiveness. Why? Because we're feeding ourselves with this wisdom. So on the opposite, why are materialists, you could say, spiritually weak in their humility, in their appreciation, and their forgiveness? Because they do not feed themselves with spiritual knowledge. So the question may arise is that then why is it seen that even though maybe spiritualists may be feeding their minds with spiritual knowledge every day, why is it appears that they're spiritually dead, just like materialists? Spiritually dead. It's very simple. And it's described in our teachings. The answer to this question is that, for example, if you don't eat food, you die, right? However, suppose you eat food, but that food is tainted with poison, then you also die. In much the same way, what's the demarcation between a materialist and a spiritualist? A materialist is happy when they're honored and unhappy when someone else is honored. But if a spiritualist is happy when they're honored and unhappy when someone else is honored, then what's the demarcation between a spiritualist and a materialist? Even in the Holy Bible, Lord Jesus describes this demarcation. He says, if you only love your enemies, then what credit is that to you? Even sinners, if you love those who love, Jesus says, if you love those who love you, then what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. If you only do good to those who do good to you, then what credit is that to you? Even sinners do good to those who do good to them. So what's the demarcation between a materialist and a spiritualist? So just as a person will physically die if they don't eat food, or just as a person will physically die if they consume food with poison. So also it's described that Avaishnava Mukham Girnam Putam Harikatamrita Shravanam Naiva Kartaviyam Sarpochistam Yatapayaha. It says that if we're feeding ourselves with spiritual knowledge every day and we still remain like a materialist, then the question is that we're probably feeding ourselves with poison. And what is that poison? The poison of pride. Always want to put ourselves in a position above others. And so Srila Prabhupada explains this in one of his lectures. So there's a lecture by Prabhupada you can look up on Database. So this lecture was given in March 11th, 1969 in Hawaii. And so Srila Prabhupada says, quote, "So in spite of all his good qualifications, if he is simply proud, then everything becomes zero. In our country, milk is considered to be very nice, nutritious food. But if it is touched by the lips of the serpent, it is finished, no more. Similarly, one may have all these qualifications if he becomes Brahmana or Kshatriya or very high class, very aristocratic, all of this. That is all right. But if it is simply false prestige, if it is meant simply for showing one's false prestige, then those qualifications have no value. And when there's no value, he cannot purify himself, but to speak of purifying his whole family." So that's the answer to that. So we should be very humble. Trinada pisuni chena tador eva sahishuna amanina manadena kirtaniya sarahari. So this is, I'll end with this. So we remain spiritually strong by feeding ourselves with wisdom. And not only that, feeding ourselves with wisdom that's not tainted with our egos, tainted with poison. Then we can remain very spiritually strong. So there's another analogy of how we can remain spiritually strong. And this is one of my favorite ones. So this is from the Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter 18, verse 13. And it's spoken by Prahlad Maharaj. Some prayers of Prahlad Maharaj in the 5th canto, even though normally his prayers are in the 7th canto. And Prahlad Maharaj, he says, Harehi Saksha Bhagavan Shadini Nama Majashanamivato Yam Ipsitam Hitwamaham Samyadi Sajate Griyetada Mahatwam Vayasanta Patinam. The operative word in this verse is Jashanam, aquatics. So Prahlad, he says, just as a shark who stays in the ocean is powerful, and a shark who strays from the ocean is powerless, so if we stay in the ocean of Krishna consciousness, we remain powerful. If we stray from this ocean, we become powerless. So there's a nice compare and contrast story in this regard, and it's comparing Haridas Thakur, who teaches us what to do, versus another devotee named Ramachandra Puri, who teaches us what not to do. So for reference, so if anyone want to reference this story, let's see. This story is Haridas Thakur pastime is mentioned in a book, a scripture called Chaitanya Bhagavat, and the section is titled Madhya, chapter 10, verse 35 through 44. In the part regarding Ramachandra Puri, this is from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, one of our other scriptures, and the section is called the Antya Leela, chapter 8, verse 18 through 27. So once upon a time, there was a great saint named Haridas Thakur, and he happened to be born in another religion, but he converted to Krishna consciousness. So one day, the members of Haridas Thakur's former religion, they approached him. They says, "My dear Haridas Thakur, if you convert back to our religion, then there will be no problem for you. But if you don't, then we will beat you in 22 marketplaces to set an example of what happens to someone who leaves our religion." So Haridas Thakur, he told them, "My dear brothers, just as the sun has many different names in many different languages, so also the one supreme God, he has many different names in many different languages. For whatever reason, the Lord is inspiring me to call him Krishna, and the Lord is inspiring you to call him something else. But that's no problem. We're all brothers and sisters. They weren't inspired. So they kept their promise. They literally beat him in 22 marketplaces. So after the first marketplace, they beat him. He survived a beating, a whipping. Then they took him to another marketplace. They beat him. And this is in Bangladesh or India at the time, 500 years ago. So in this way, after they came to the 22nd marketplace and they were completely exhausted. It's like, how is he still alive? This is impossible. So it's described that Lord Chaitanya actually protected Haridasa Kaur where he couldn't feel any other beating. It's like when you go to a hospital, how are you able to tolerate surgery? They give you anesthesia. So the Lord gave Haridasa Kaur the anesthesia of the Yasyasi Bhaktir Bhagavatiya Kinshana Sarva Gunis Tatra Samasate Suraha. He gave him the anesthesia of all the good qualities of a great saint, like forgiveness. So the moral of this, not only that, Lord Chaitanya says, he says, my Sudarshan chakra, one of his weapons, was ready to come down from the spiritual world and kill these religious fanatics. But Haridasa Kaur, because you only saw the good in their heart, my weapon was powerless to harm them. So what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that Haridasa Kaur was at the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong people. But because he had the right mentality, the ocean of Krishna consciousness, he remained very powerful and happy. A shark in the ocean is powerful and happy because Haridasa Kaur remained situated in the ocean of Krishna consciousness, the ocean of forgiveness, mercy, love, compassion. He remained powerful and happy. So, in contrast, there's a story of Ramachandra Puri. So once upon a time, there was a very proud devotee named Ramachandra Puri. And he was surrounded by a community of devotees who loved him, who treated him with so much love, so much honor, so much respect, including one of our incarnations, primary incarnations of the Lord named Lord Chaitanya. But he will always find fault with devotees, and the reason is that one day his guru name is Madhavendra Puri. Is that correct? Madhavendra Puri, I believe so. So one day his guru named Madhavendra Puri was on his deathbed, and he was crying in separation of Krishna. But Ramachandra Puri, he criticized his own guru. Can you imagine criticizing your professor at college? What will happen if you criticize your professor? You don't have no idea what you're talking about. You probably won't graduate, right? So he criticized his guru. He says, my dear Guru Maharaj, in the Gita, Krishna says, a wise person laments neither for the living nor for the dead because the soul is eternal and indestructible. Na jayate na mriyate na kadachin. It's indestructible. So why are you crying? So it's described that he jumped to a conclusion. His Guru Maharaj was crying in separation from Krishna, not that he's dying or not that there's no life after death. He was just crying in connection with his relationship with the Supreme Lord, his love for the Lord. But Ramachandra Puri jumped to conclusions. And it's described because of this Guru aparad, this offense to the Guru, he cannot see any good in anyone. And so he would even serve people prasadam, food, just to find fault with them. He says, Prabhu, would you like some more food, some more prasadam? And they was like, yes, Prabhu, bring it on. Then he would call them, you're a pig. So he would serve them just to find fault. He even found fault with Lord Chaitanya. He says, my dear Lord Chaitanya, you're a sannyasi, but I see that there are ants in your rooms. That means you must be hiding some sweets. What was that, Angel? What was that fruit what was that fruit the other day? Huh? Acai. Apparently there's a fruit called acai that's apparently like the most natural, healthy, but like a sweet fruit that's almost like an intoxicant, almost, right? Something like that, or it's a superfood. Now I'm curious. But Donovan Prabhu had it the other day, and so did Sevananda, so he knew what Angel was talking about. So he's like, you're hiding acai. You must be hiding a whole bunch of acai. Is that correct? Acai. And globulins and sweet rice. Because there's so many ants in here. And so in this way, Ramachandra Puri found fault with everyone. He couldn't see any good in anyone. So what's the moral of the story? I could personally relate to the story of Ramachandra Puri more than Haridasa Kaur. So the moral of the story is that Ramachandra Puri, he was at the right place at the right time with the right people. But because he had the wrong mentality, the land of Maya, a shark that strays to the land is powerless and unhappy. So how do we know that we strayed to Maya when we're unhappy? I've never seen anybody look happy finding fault with others. You know what? They have so many faults. Is this really bringing you so much bliss? You know, they're this, they're that. So he strayed far to the land of Maya. So there's a saying. It says, and it's described, why should we respect people? Now, it's very counterintuitive. Is that correct? Counterintuitive to respect people who don't respect them. Now, Angel, would you respect somebody who doesn't respect you? Wow. All right, we have a great. That would be the goal. So at least, good. At least that's a goal we should be striving for. But most people, that's not even a goal. They're like, heck no. So it's counterintuitive to respect people who don't respect us. Like Haridasa Kaur respected these people who didn't respect him. But it's also counterproductive, meaning we're actually hurting ourselves when we don't respect people who don't respect us. To make it clear, there's a nice saying. It says, a wise man was once asked, what is anger? He gave a very beautiful answer. He said, anger is a punishment we give ourselves for someone else's mistake. So actually, we're punishing ourselves when we don't respect people. So what's the conclusion? Therefore, in the Gita, Krishna says in chapter 14, Mam chayo aviyabacharena bhati yogena sevate saguna samati taitam brahma bhuyaya kalpate. This is a verse that's spoken by Krishna after Arjuna says, how can I remain spiritually enthusiastic? So Krishna says, treat honor and dishonor the same. Fame, infamy, happiness and stress. Why? Because if our happiness is only dependent on being honored and respected, then that means if nobody ever honored you, if nobody ever respected you, then you will never be happy. So Krishna says, focus on mamchayo aviyabichanena bhati yogena sevate saguna samati taitam brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Focus on the language of love. Why? Because what happens when people don't respect us? We start speaking the language of hate. And nobody ever feels happy speaking the language of hate, right? So therefore, he says, focus on your Krishna consciousness, be their well-wisher, because in the end, you're harming yourself in the end. So that's essentially our topic for today. There's many things that could be said, elaborating more on this particular verse, but since we had a long program of Dhammadarashikam and a long verse, then the time is very limited. I'm surprised it's only, what time is it? 3:30, 8:36. 8:38. Well, are there any, maybe before I mention maybe one last point, are there any other comments, questions, criticisms? That's all welcome. Criticism? Okay. Hold on, there's a mic coming. We could switch. Vivu Prabhu, do you mind doing the honors? Thank you, Prabhu.
My question is, when it comes to self-love, how would one go about, like, finding it or nurturing it and building that with the topic you're speaking on today and the ways of these leaders and mentors?
Did everyone hear a question? Because if anyone has a, also, How do we focus on self-love? And what is the role in self-love, and what does Krishna say in regards to our leaders and how they teach us about self-love? Well, it's kind of what that quote says, we do more to harm ourselves than others. When we become angry, then we're actually punishing ourselves. So that means you hate yourself, actually. So it's not self-love. But there's many answers, many analogies. The one thing that comes to mind, if we're sticking kind of to this analogy of this theme of feeding ourselves with wisdom today, we see that, so there's a famous verse in our teachings. It says, Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasade Poi Bhakti Lata Bija. It says that we have it says the guru, but we have many gurus. It's described that we have many people in our lives, not just one person. Many people who gives us the seeds of their love, the seeds of wisdom, right? The seeds, etc. And that even though they give us a seed, it's our job to cultivate that seed. Just like if somebody gave you a seed, it's your responsibility to cultivate the seed so you could grow a beautiful garden or a beautiful tree. Now, how do you grow this garden? That when you grow a garden, it takes a lot of work. You just can't be a couch potato. Ask any farmer. So when you're growing a farm or a garden or a tree, there's something that could prevent the seed of love, the seed of wisdom from actually growing. And that's known as weeds. And so what are our weeds in our life? One of the primary weeds that prevents us from self-love, you could say, is envy. So you take there's so many analogies to pretty much explain the same thing over and over. And they just give us different realizations because everything is our guru. So this is a lesson. They give so many analogies that basically we're all meant to cultivate this self-love. And so we have to pull out these weeds of pride, envy, vengeance, etc. And in this way, the fruit of our love could grow. Now, one other analogy regarding this tree analogy is very beautiful because what's the word selfish mean? Now, what do people think selfish means? People think the word selfish, they equate it to self-love. I do things that bring me more pleasure, right? And for them, this is self-love. And we're also advocating selfishness too, contrary to popular belief. Most people think, oh, you're promoting selflessness. You could argue that, but we're also promoting selfishness. Selfishness. How so? It's very simple. It's a very beautiful analogy, a famous analogy. It says, if you want to serve a tree, then do you water the roots, or do you water all the twigs, branches, and leaves? You water the roots, right? In this way, all the twigs, branches, and leaves are automatically watered. So it's described that if we serve the roots of existence, then we automatically serve our family, society, and nation. So what does selfishness means? Selfishness means that it's like a foolish person who waters all the twigs, branches, and leaves without watering the root. What happens when you water the twigs, branches, and leaves? It's nice for the leaf at first, but it's miserable in the end because the root is not watered. In much the same way, real selfishness to benefit yourself, self-love, is actually to water that root to serve Krishna. So that's real self-love. By watering the root of existence, by serving Krishna, then this is real love, and we have to become greedy for this. So Krishna bhakti rasa bhavitsa matihi kriyatam yadi kuto api labhyate tatra loliam api mulyam ekalam jama koti sukritir na labhyate. It says we should become loliam, greedy to serve Krishna. And the analogy was that is that the gopis, angel, it's described that Krishna has some friends. They're known as gopis, cowherd girlfriends. And they're so in love with Krishna that when it's described that a demigod, we have these material bodies, and Krishna empowered a demigod named Brahma to create these physical bodies. And among these physical bodies, we have our eyes, and our eyes blink, right? We can't keep our eyes open forever, can we? We have to blink them, right? So the gopis criticize Brahma. They says, my dear Brahma, you do not know how to create, because when our eyes blink and we cannot see Krishna, it's as if we died. So this is loyum greed. So this is the type of greed and self-love that we try our best to cultivate. We can appreciate it theoretically, but on a practical level, I mean, we do our best we can, and that's why we're in like-minded associations to try to keep these things in mind of what is real love, what is real selfishness, is Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Matihi. Our love for Krishna focused on that. So anyway, that was a long answer, so forgive me, but I hope it answered it. I guess we're done, right? So thank you everyone for your kind attention, and Srimad Bhagavatam, Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai, Gaura Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.